Inland wetlands and floodplains, or the areas where the river overflows, allow precipitation to move more slowly into groundwater and run off less quickly to streams and store some of this water on the landscape. Wetland plants and other vegetation that are along these waterways help reduce the speed of the flow of these waters and can reduce the height of the water during flooding events. We can see this in real life when we remove wetlands. So, for example, there's a permitting program in the United States where if you fill or damage a stream or a wetland, there you have to have a permit and there's reported. So places where there's a lot of these permits and a lot of these impacts to wetlands and streams, you see a higher frequency of larger stream events and higher flood peak. We also see the opposite, that when we add vegetation and reforest along streams and rivers, particularly upstream in the watershed, this decreases flooding, and this effect increases as the vegetation matures and forests grow. Similarly, coastal wetlands, as we've just heard about, and other coastal habitats like seagrass can provide coastal protection from storms. Overall, they dampen wave energy, and this video is showing an example of wave energy going through vegetation, and you can see that the waves dissipate and disappear by the time you reach the shoreline. And so this reduces things like shoreline erosion, as well as kind of the stormwater going big storm surges and salt water moving inland. A study by Narayan et al. In 2017 found that coastal wetlands prevented about $625 million in flood damages during Hurricane Sandy and reduced flood depth on more than 1,200 miles of roads. So they can have a significant impact, even if they're not as good as living shorelines. They have a very large extent. In North Carolina, we have a lot of these habitats, which is great. We have 3.5 million acres of freshwater wetlands, about 1.8 million acres of floodplain forests, and around 280,000 acres of coastal wetlands. The blue are the freshwater wetlands in the coastal plain primarily. The floodplain forests are anywhere there's streams or rivers, and so they're all over the state. And the coastal wetlands, of course, are right along the coast in the purple color there. What we'd like to encourage is the protection and restoration of these habitats where they can do the most to protect people, communities, and critical natural and cultural resources. What we've done is we've mapped the potential for these natural habitats to provide protection from flooding, and we overlay this with information on where the protection is most needed. And this can tell us where we should protect and restore these habitats. Here I'm showing some initial results on restoration opportunities, and we found that there's more than 1.5 million acres in North Carolina of floodplains, that's this active area that tends to flood around rivers, that are not yet developed and could be restored based on where historic forest cover was. And these are the green areas on the map. We also find that there are about 1.5 million acres of wetlands that could potentially be restored, and this is on agricultural lands. And this is the purple on the map. Much of this is concentrated in the eastern part of the state, where large rivers and flatter topography create this wider floodplain area, and these are historic wetland areas that have been drained largely for agriculture. However, looking across the state, these habitats are all over the place, but not everywhere are they as important for protecting communities and people. So what we want to try to do is now figure out where is it most important to manage these habitats. And here we've overlaid the red lines are around counties that have over $25 million in historic flood damage cumulatively since 1978. And so these are areas where there's significant property damage repeatedly occurring. And so if we look in those red boundaries and those counties, we can see that a number of these have a lot of purple and green, which means there's a lot of opportunity to potentially restore some of these habitats and potentially help reduce flood impacts in these areas. Another way to look at this is that we can look at areas where there's high population living within these floodplain areas that tend to have a lot of flowing water. And so these are potentially where higher populations are at risk, and the darker gray is where there's a higher population in those zones. And we can again look at where those overlay with the green and the purple areas and think about those might be areas where we want to really think about restoring these habitats. So this star is over the city of Kinston, North Carolina, and we're going to show a little bit more detail there. So Kinston, North Carolina is a city in the Neuse River with historically high flood losses. It flooded during both Matthew and Florence, and it has about 4,500 people that are living in the active river area. And if you look at this closely, you'll see there's a lot of the purple and the green that are upstream of the city, where the most populated area. So it has a lot of restorable land in the floodplains and the wetlands there. And so Kinston might be a great opportunity to do some restoration of habitats that might help reduce some of the flooding into the city. So similarly, we can look at the coastal habitats around North Carolina and map where they might be most important for communities. Many of North Carolina's wetlands, coastal wetlands, are near human habitation. So here we see the purple are the coastal salt marshes, and the blue is populated areas, and the darker blue means there's more people. And in North Carolina, about 80,000 people live in areas that benefit from wetlands protection from coastal storms. So where we have these purple areas between the ocean and the blue areas. So we have a lot of that in North Carolina, which is great, and we want to try to protect those areas. But one thing to keep in mind is that with climate change, these shorelines are going to be changing, and these habitats are going to need to be migrating inwards, potentially as our communities migrate inwards. And so we need to provide opportunities for that to happen, and so that means we need areas that aren't as urbanized and where the ocean waters and tide waters can flow inward. So we need possibility for these marshes to migrate inward. There are other areas in North Carolina that are high hazard areas, and by this we mean there's potential for high wind and wave exposure and high storm surge potential that do not have these kinds of coastal habitats in front of them. So we have Elizabeth City here as an example where we have a populated area that does not have any of the coastal habitat there. So we can identify these as possible areas for restoration. There are about 48,000 people that live in areas like this in North Carolina. And maybe opportunities for restoration, although we can't always restore these areas for various different reasons related to water depth or salinity or structures potentially that are in the way. And again, we have the climate change issue here. We want to think about where we're restoring these so that we're restoring them in places that are more resilient and can be maintained over time with climate change and sea level rise. Wetlands and floodplains provide a lot of flood benefits we've talked about, but they also provide a lot of other benefits that we might want to think about. So there are other reasons to protect these areas, including recreational opportunities like hiking, boating, fishing, hunting, and wildlife watching. They also provide water quality protection. So in regular sized storms, they can slow down and capture that water, which helps with filtration and purification, reducing sedimentation and pollutants. In larger storms, the effect is more, hopefully, to reduce flooding on big facilities like water treatment plants and hog lagoons to reduce kind of event-created pollution events that can be intense and significant. In the coastal areas, these habitats also benefit fisheries, so juvenile fish and fisheries, and they also provide a big opportunity for carbon storage and sequestration. So that can help mitigate climate change and reduce the effects of climate change if we have enough of these habitats around. So Executive Order 80 was released in October 2018 by Governor Roy Cooper, and it's on the North Carolina's commitment to address climate change and transition to a clean energy economy. And it has generated conversations momentum across the state on various issues related to climate change. The order talks about conservation and protection and preservation of state lands and waters in public trust, and points to the need to improve resilience to climate-related weather and other disruption events. It calls for resiliency and adaptation planning, and so our work is supporting those pieces of the plan. While the focus is really on what the state can do with its lands, it is also motivating collaboration and conversations with federal agency partners, with land trusts, and other non-governmental organizations that can help work on natural habitat solutions, not just on the government lands, but also on private lands. And that's very important. Private lands are more than 85% of North Carolina's natural and working lands. That's about 51% are privately owned forests, 27% is agriculture. Therefore, if we really want to have the impact on these lands across the state and achieve some of these flood reduction benefits, we're going to have to partner with private lands, and so engaging organizations and communities that work with private landowners. And the Natural and Working Lands group that I'm part of and that Will is part of, sitting over there, is working on that. So there are a lot of different organizations and communities that have been brought together that the state is kind of fostering a conversation that will try to engage both private and public landowners in these kinds of activities. So just quickly, the take-home messages from my talk today are that floodplains, wetlands, and a suite of different kinds of coastal habitats can help protect people and property from storm damages. That North Carolina has a lot of these kinds of habitats, but not always where we need them. But we also need to protect them where they are so they don't disappear and we result in worse flooding. And that we can target these restoration and conservation activities where they can bring the most benefit, not just for reducing flooding, but also for these other benefits, the recreational benefits, the climate mitigation benefits that I mentioned. And we can take direct action on government-owned lands, particularly state-owned lands, potentially through this opportunity that the state has provided with this executive order. But we also will need other partners and strategies to move forward on private lands. So thank you.